If I'm not too mistaken, we should go to the letter S and ask Mr. Slettholm to talk to us from Norway.
Thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm not representing Norway right now, but I'm representing the International Federation of Reproduction Rights Organizations, IFRO. And I am the CEO of the Norwegian RRO called Copinor. And I'm also myself an author previously of musical works. So I would also like to have that as a point of departure, since the title of this session is Authors' Rights in the Digital Era. And I would really like to start with claiming that authors' rights or copyright is not the problem, it is the solution. Also in the digital era. It is sometimes presented as a challenge, as a problem that we have to get around. And of course, there are challenges and there are problems in handling copyright in the digital era. But in the end, I think it's the solution to the problem of quality content, also in the digital era. I'm also happy to refer to Mr. Robert Darnton yesterday, who said he was happy that he was not going to talk about the death of the book, but the future of the book. And in the same manner, I will not talk about the death of copyright, but the future of copyright also in the digital era. And also the title of this session is Open versus Protected. And I don't think those two terms are oppositions. Open and protected are not really oppositions, they can be seen in a context. For example, bookstores are of course open, and so is a book which can be opened, but that doesn't mean that the book is not protected. So openness and protectedness are really two ways of the same thing. And usually the book is not available for free in the bookstore, but it is available for everyone, and I also think it can be so in the digital era. I also think that the author's perspective is very important, because an author has the right by the Berne Convention and several other international instruments to decide upon his work, his or her work, and who else should decide than the person who has created it. Now we can always discuss how these rights are going to be handled digitally, but I really don't see any alternative on who is going to decide how my work is going to be exploited. But then, of course, also the author needs publishers, and I also think maybe even more a publisher is needed in the digital era than in the paper era, because there is really an abundance of words out there on the internet, and we really need editors. We need somebody who can select. We need somebody who can do the quality improvement, and I think the authors sometimes think that his work is very valuable in itself, but really the publisher has an important role in adding value to the work. We need someone who can make adaptations. We need somebody who can design and somebody who can market and make the work available to the right public, visible to the right public in the digital era. And we also need someone who can handle the economic part of it and can make sure that the author gets his remuneration or his money when the work is sold. Of course, the role and the methods of the publisher will change, and it is changing. But I think the need is there, and as I said, even more than before. So then it's this value chain. It's the author and the publisher, and it's the role of the book. It's the sales in a market, which we often call the primary use of the work. But once the work is published and is there in the market, there is a need for a wider use of it. Of course, the libraries must be allowed to lend out the book, also digitally. We need to have access for the disabled to different types of works. We need the right, usually in most countries, to copy a work for private use. And these issues are usually solved by legislation, which are different in different countries, and by exceptions to the right of the author to an unrestricted disposition of his own work. But these exceptions cannot undermine the author's rights, and they has to compensate the author for the use of his or her work, be it public lending rights for libraries or private copying remuneration for those countries where that is allowed. And then we have a third use of the work, which is the need of copying parts of works or whole works which are parts of a larger publication. And that is where the RROs, which I represent, come in. Schools, universities, companies, organizations, they have the need to copy. It's so-called secondary use of the work, and it is the same need also digitally within these institutions to use works. There's a vast number of authors and publishers out there. There are thousands of publishers and millions of authors, and it is important for these institutions that need access to a large number of works that this can be done in one click, so to speak, that it can be done in a one-stop shop. And I also think in the digital era, the publishers and the authors will need RROs, and the users will need RROs in order to get this access to a large number of works simply and easily at one place. We need the collective societies who can do this mass clearance of work. Of course, it has to be dealt with differently in the digital world, but still the need will be there, and I think the future will be there. Then let me soon end within the 10-minute limit to remind of what was said by Mrs. Milagros de Corral yesterday, that internet is a very young medium. It is still in its infancy. The change is very large, the technological change is very large, but there have been changes before, and copyright has adapted to those changes. And I think copyright will adapt also to this technological change, because internet is really not a new world. It is not a new society, but it is part of the existing world, and it is part of the existing society, and we have to remind ourselves on that, and always the technological shifts will come first, and the solutions will come afterwards. I could remind about the invention of broadcasting, the phonograph industry, movies, films, cinemas. Technology was there. Also the photocopying machine. The technology come first, and then the solution has come. One has to adapt the legislation. One has to invent instruments like, for example, Arrow, and like RROs were invented. There have to be organizations, but we will fix this. Internet will prove some challenges, but problems can be solved. And let me end with what I started to say. Authors' rights really is the solution to the problem, to how we can secure quality content and access to quality content, and secure a creative industry also in the digital era. Thank you.